A billionaire's dinner, shattered by one unforgivable insult. A mistress stands up, every eye locked on her, and she spits out two words meant to destroy a powerful black woman at the table. But the room has no idea. The woman she tried to humiliate is the silent architect behind a $2 billion empire, and she's holding a secret clause that can ruin careers, collapse fortunes, and end relationships in a single stroke. That insult wasn't just racism. It was a mistake, a fatal one, because the quiet woman everyone underestimated just picked up her pen and declared war. And what happens next? You won't see it coming. The moment it happened, the entire restaurant seemed to inhale at once, like the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner, a quiet evening in a private dining room where billion-dollar deals were toasted in aged wine and whispered ambition. Crystal glassware glimmered under soft lighting. Smooth jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Servers glided like shadows, trained to be invisible unless summoned. But when Courtney Blake pushed her chair back, scraping the polished floor with a shrill, jarring note, everything elegant shattered. Her movement was sharp, aggressive like a blade unsheathed. Heads turned from the other tables. Utensils froze halfway to lips. Even Brandon Mitchell, her boyfriend and William's business partner, paused mid-cut of his steak. She stood tall, every inch of her shaking with fury disguised as confidence. Her blonde curls rested perfectly on her shoulders, her dress hugging her like she'd poured herself into wealth. But her eyes burned with something primal, ugly, ancient. Courtney Blake had just decided that a woman like Gabrielle Thompson, black, brilliant, and unapologetically unbothered, didn't deserve to sit at her table. And she was ready to make sure everyone heard it. Gabrielle didn't flinch when Courtney rose. She simply placed her wine glass down on the linen tablecloth, her fingers steady, her expression calm in a way that felt dangerous. The music dipped, or maybe it just felt that way, because tension has a way of quieting everything around it. William's hand reached under the table, instinctively brushing Gabrielle's knee, a silent question. "Are you okay?" She gave the slightest shake of her head, not in fear, but in warning. And then Courtney's voice sliced the room in half. "You know what you are?" she spat, her face twisted into something venomous. "Street. Garbage." It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a private insult delivered behind manicured hands. It was a declaration meant to humiliate, meant to wound, meant to stamp Gabrielle back into whatever box the world had once forced her into. Gasps erupted around the room. Even one server, mid-pour, froze entirely, red wine trembling at the lip of the bottle, ready to spill but too afraid to finish its fall. Courtney wasn't finished. "You don't belong here," she continued, taking a step closer to Gabrielle, as if proximity made her cruelty more legitimate. "Not at this table. Not in this world. Not beside a man like William." Brandon shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Too cowardly, too complicit. William finally rose, fury blazing across his normally composed face. But Gabrielle didn't. She remained seated, shoulders straight, chin lifted, still as a storm that hasn't yet decided where it will strike. Her silence was louder than Courtney's rage, louder than the shocked whispers spreading from table to table, louder than William's nearly trembling anger. Courtney mistook that silence for weakness, an opening to strike deeper. "William could have had anyone," she continued, voice cracking with the arrogance of someone who thought wealth equaled superiority. "Anyone with class, with pedigree, with real breeding. But he settled for you. Someone who crawled in out of nowhere. Someone who should have stayed in the gutter where she belongs." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Even those who had never experienced discrimination could feel the venom dripping from her tone. It wasn't just an insult. It was an attack, a weapon sharpened by racism, insecurity, and desperation. Still, Gabrielle didn't speak. She blinked once, slowly, not in defeat, but in calculation. And that's what Courtney didn't see, what no one at that table understood. Gabrielle wasn't quiet because she was hurt. She was quiet because she was thinking, strategizing, measuring the size of the battlefield she had just been handed. William placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Don't," Gabrielle said softly. Just one word. Soft, but powerful enough to hold him in place. She finally rose. Not abruptly, not like Courtney. She rose with the slow, steady grace of a woman who refuses to be dragged down to anyone's level. Gabrielle looked Courtney dead in her eyes that were now wild with self-righteous triumph. But Gabrielle's gaze was calm, cold, unshakable, steel forged by hardship, sharpened by survival. In that moment, anyone paying attention could feel it. Something had shifted, and Gabrielle spoke just one sentence. Quiet, almost gentle, but so chilling the room seemed to exhale frost. "Enjoy your evening, Courtney, because this will be your last celebration for a very long time." The words weren't shouted. They weren't angry. They were a verdict, a promise. Gabrielle picked up her purse, kissed William lightly on the cheek, and walked out of the private dining room. Head high, shoulders squared, dignity radiating off her like armor. Her heels clicked across the marble floor with the precision of a ticking clock counting down to something inevitable. Every eye followed her, not with pity, but with awe. No tears, no trembling, no shouting match, just silence. A silence that felt like the beginning of something catastrophic. Because what no one at that table knew, what Courtney couldn't possibly imagine, was that Gabrielle held far more power than she'd ever shown. More than anyone at that dinner understood. More than Courtney had the intelligence or restraint to consider. Gabrielle wasn't a trophy wife. She wasn't a charity case invited into a wealthy man's world. She was the architect behind the billion-dollar deal they'd gathered to celebrate. She was the legal mind they all depended on, the strategist whose signature alone could keep Brandon's empire afloat. And she had just been given a reason, a deeply personal, unforgivable reason, to use that power. Her silence as she exited the restaurant wasn't defeat. It was the calm before devastation, the stillness before a reckoning, a warning that the woman Courtney mocked, underestimated, and publicly humiliated, was about to change the trajectory of all their lives. Because when Gabrielle Thompson leaves a room in silence, she's not retreating. She's declaring war. Welcome my beautiful family and friends to my YouTube channel. Please click on subscribe, like, share, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, back to the story. People always saw the surface first. It was human nature, Gabrielle had learned. Most folks judged what they could see, not what they could never survive. To the polished elite of Boston's business world, Gabrielle Thompson was a beautiful ornament on William Hartford's arm. The billionaire's wife, the quiet one at dinners, the woman who listened more than she spoke, who didn't fill the room with noise or ego. They mistook that silence for softness. They mistook grace for weakness. They mistook humility for absence of power. They were wrong. Dangerously wrong, because beneath the tailored dresses and the calm smile lived a woman carved, sharpened, and tempered by Detroit's hardest corners, where silence wasn't a character trait, but a survival strategy. Gabrielle didn't grow up clinking champagne glasses. She grew up listening for sirens, listening for gunshots, listening for her mother's exhausted footsteps returning from double shifts at the hospital. Her first lessons weren't taught in private schools. They were taught on cracked sidewalks and bus rides that smelled of sweat and fear. The world saw a billionaire's wife. But Gabrielle never forgot she was also the little girl who ate cereal for dinner because there wasn't enough money for anything else. She was the teenager studying under streetlights because their electricity had been cut again. She was the young woman who worked 3 jobs while putting herself through community college. She was the woman no one ever saw coming. Courtney Blake, born with just enough privilege to believe she deserved everything she touched, looked at Gabrielle and saw poverty, saw inferiority, saw someone she believed she could crush in public without consequence. She had no idea she had just declared war on a woman whose entire life had been a battlefield. Because Gabrielle didn't grow up learning embroidery, etiquette, or how to charm high society. She grew up learning resilience, tenacity, focus so sharp it scared people who underestimated her. To survive where she came from, Gabrielle learned how to think 5 steps ahead, how to read danger before it even spoke, how to assess people's motives with forensic precision. Detroit didn't make her fragile. Detroit made her unbreakable. And it was that same unbreakable spirit that carried her from community college to law school, from late nights studying to passing the bar on her first attempt. When Gabrielle walked into her first corporate law office, surrounded by marble floors and men who believed she didn't belong, she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't intimidated by the towers of wealth or the pedigreed surnames. She had survived things they never could. She had clawed her way out of a life they would have died in. So, when William Hartford first approached her at that legal conference years ago, he didn't fall for a pretty face or a charming accent. He fell for a mind sharper than the entire panel of attorneys put together. He fell for a woman who had built her future from the ashes of her past. He fell for the fire in her. But the world didn't see that. Most of them didn't want to. They saw her as the lucky one, the woman who married into Hartford wealth. They didn't know she was the reason William's business empire remained stable. They didn't know she saved millions with a single negotiation. They didn't know she rewrote contracts so airtight a hurricane couldn't tear them open. She wasn't just beside him. She was behind him, beneath him, above him, building, advising, strategizing. He knew it. She knew it. But the world? The world loved its illusions. Still, illusion doesn't change truth. And the truth was this. Gabrielle Thompson was the strategist behind the entire $2 billion development project. She designed the legal framework. She structured the joint partnership. She created the protections. She built the very backbone of the deal that Brandon and William toasted with expensive wine. Her mind was the foundation. Her foresight, the architecture. Her signature, yes, her signature, was the final key required to unlock every permit, every filing, every financial milestone. The billionaires and their girlfriends didn't know that. They didn't see the power disguised in quiet observation. They didn't see the danger that lives inside a brilliant woman underestimated. Courtney thought she was slapping Gabrielle with shame. Calling her street garbage was supposed to sting. It was supposed to remind Gabrielle of a past she should be embarrassed of. But here's what Courtney never understood, what people like her almost never understand. Gabrielle's past was not a wound. It was her weapon, her armor, her foundation. Growing up in Detroit taught Gabrielle more strategy than any Ivy League MBA program ever could. It taught her how to read people like case files. It taught her to listen before striking. It taught her to calculate risk with terrifying accuracy. It taught her that silence can be the loudest threat in the room. So when Courtney lunged at that past, trying to turn it into humiliation, she didn't pierce Gabrielle. She simply revealed her own ignorance. Gabrielle's origins weren't her weakness. They were her edge. Her rise wasn't luck. It was warfare. Every step, every achievement, every victory she earned came from grit, discipline, and willpower Courtney could never comprehend. And now that same gritty brilliance was about to collapse the world Courtney relied on. Courtney mocked her as a street girl. She thought that made Gabrielle small, but it made Gabrielle dangerous. Because people who survive the streets don't fear losing reputations, money, or status. They have already lived through worse. Courtney insulted a woman she assumed was powerless. But Gabrielle was the architect of the empire Courtney was trying to marry into. She wasn't just at the table. She built the table, and she held the blueprint to take it apart, piece by piece, without raising her voice or lifting her hand. Gabrielle's past was not a scar. It was the reason she was about to win. And the moment Courtney realized that truth, it would already be too late. Because Courtney hadn't insulted a billionaire's wife. She had insulted a survivor, a strategist, a woman with nothing left to fear, a woman whose silence was a calculated warning, and whose next move would decide who rose and who fell. And in a world driven by power, reputation, and legacy, underestimating a woman like Gabrielle was the gravest mistake anyone could make, especially when she was the one holding the $2 billion key. The city outside Gabrielle's office glittered like 1,000 diamonds scattered across black silk, but inside her four walls, nothing sparkled. Not the awards on her shelves. Not the framed degrees. Not even the photo of her and William laughing on their anniversary trip. Tonight, Gabrielle wasn't a wife. She wasn't a socialite. She wasn't the calm, polite woman who walked out of a restaurant with unshaken dignity after being publicly humiliated. Tonight, she was a lawyer, a strategist, a woman sharpening fury into focus. She closed the office door behind her with a soft click, the kind that always felt louder in an empty room. Her heels echoed across the hardwood floor as she crossed her desk, dropped her purse, and pulled the thick project binder toward her. The $2 billion waterfront development deal, the pride of Williams' empire, the lifeline of Brandon Mitchell's entire financial future. The opportunity Courtney Blake thought gave her the right to speak down to Gabrielle. She flipped the binder open. The pages whispered against each other like secrets leaning too close. Anger burned behind her ribs, but her hands were steady. She didn't rush. She didn't skim. No, Gabrielle read like a surgeon operating on a heart. Slow, precise, deadly if needed. She knew these documents inside and out. She had drafted half of them, restructured a third, protected Williams' interests in every paragraph. But tonight, she read them differently. Not as legal counsel, not as a supportive partner, but as a woman searching for leverage. A pressure point, a weakness hidden in ink. And 5 minutes in, the world shifted. Her fingers stilled on a clause tucked neatly between two routine paragraphs. Section 14b, subsection 4. A detail so quiet most attorneys wouldn't blink twice unless they were trained to look for landmines. But Gabrielle had grown up spotting landmines. She could see danger before someone even lit the fuse. The clause was simple, almost elegant in its subtlety. Any major project filing, including zoning approvals, permit requests, and contractor agreements, required 2 signatures, Williams and his legal representatives. Gabrielle blinked once, then again, slow, controlled, his legal representative. Her signature, the key, the lock, the gatekeeper of the entire development. She leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly beneath her. Somewhere inside her chest, something clicked into place, like destiny realigning itself. Every major decision on this project, every approval, every advancement, every financial milestone needed her consent. Without her, the project froze, and the deadline for the next round of filings was 48 hours away. 48 hours. 2 days. 2 days to decide whether to let Brandon Mitchell's $2 billion dream breathe or choke. A slow smile curved her lips, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. She didn't go looking for this power, but fate had dropped it into her hands like a weapon wrapped in silk. For the first time, she held the knife. She remembered Courtney's voice in that restaurant, dripping with venom, street garbage. The insult echoed, but it no longer stung. It had transformed. It had become motivation, purpose, fuel. Gabrielle leaned forward, elbows on her desk, eyes locked onto the page, as if it were a map leading to buried treasure. And in a way, it was. Because power is always hidden in fine print, and only those who survive struggle learn to read between the lines. She flipped to the next document, then the next, and the next. Each one confirmed it. Every filing, every permit, every financial release required her signature. Brandon wouldn't be able to proceed. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever, unless she allowed it. A man who pretended not to hear Courtney's cruelty at dinner. A man who chuckled at her insults like they were entertaining. A man who thought Gabrielle was merely a wife, not the architect of the very system he depended on. He had no idea that the woman he ignored was the one holding his lifeline by a single thread. And she could cut it, effortlessly, legally, without raising her voice or breaking the law. She reread the clause again, letting its power sink in. All major filings must receive dual approval from both partners and the project's appointed legal counsel. That was her. Her name. Her authority. The one thing Brandon couldn't bypass, manipulate, or bury under corporate technicalities. Her signature was the hinge holding the entire operation together. And without it, Brandon Mitchell would drown. She thought of his debts, rumored but unspoken. His leveraged properties, his overstretched credit lines, his desperate need for this project to succeed. He wasn't just invested. He was cornered, trapped, and she had become the one who could open the cage door or lock it. Gabrielle closed the binder gently, like someone closing the final page of a story she had already decided the ending to. Then she stood and walked to the window. The city glittered below her, powerful and indifferent. But she didn't feel small looking at it. Not tonight. Not anymore. Tonight, she felt like she was standing above it, beyond it, looking down on the moving pieces of a world she suddenly understood better than ever. She pressed her fingertips lightly to the glass. Cold, sharp, alive. Her reflection stared back at her. Not the insulted woman in the restaurant, but the strategist awakened. The woman who knew her worth. The woman Detroit had forged. The woman the world underestimated at its own peril. Tomorrow, she would call Brandon into her office. She would watch panic replace his arrogance. She would present him with the truth he hoped no one would ever find buried in the fine print. And she would see, in real time, the moment he realized that the woman he ignored was the one who could destroy him. With a signature, or with silence. Either way, the knife was in her hand now. And Gabrielle Thompson had never cut anything halfway. The night after discovering the signature clause, Gabrielle couldn't sleep. Not because of anger. Not even because of the power she now held like a hidden blade. It was something deeper, an itch beneath the surface, a whisper that something about Courtney Blake didn't add up. Cruel people she knew how to handle. Entitled people she knew how to ignore. But calculated people, those were dangerous. And Courtney's insult at dinner. It wasn't drunken. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't even personal. It was strategic, targeted, practiced, like a woman swinging at an obstacle standing between her and something she believed should belong to her. Courtney hadn't insulted Gabrielle out of simple rage. She had insulted her with purpose. And purpose always hides truth. So the next morning, Gabrielle sat at her desk, sipping coffee she didn't even taste, staring at her phone. Then she scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she needed. Carla Raymond, private investigator. Carla was sharp, discreet, and unshakably loyal to the clients who treated her well. Gabrielle had worked with her before, on fraud cases, on background checks, on situations where truth needed teeth. Gabrielle, Carla answered on the second ring, voice calm and professional. Tell me what you need. I need everything on a woman named Courtney Blake, Gabrielle said. Everything, everything. There was a pause. That kind of request usually means trouble. It does, Gabrielle replied. And I need it fast. Carla exhaled softly. I'll call you in 6 hours. 6 hours felt like 6 days. Gabrielle worked, but her mind moved in circles, around Courtney's stare, her arrogance, her calculated cruelty, around William's discomfort, around Brandon's cowardice, around the way Courtney kept touching William's arm across the table, around the way she sat across from him, not her own boyfriend. By the time Carla called back, Gabrielle already knew the answer wouldn't be good. But she wasn't prepared for just how bad it really was. Are you sitting down? Carla asked. Gabrielle's spine stiffened. I am. Good. Because your girl Courtney is not who she pretends to be. Carla's voice shifted into report mode. Measured, clinical, precise. Her real name is Courtney Jane Blake, yes. But everything else? Fake. She grew up in Dayton, Ohio. Middle class. 2 brothers. Divorced parents. Nothing special. Not that there's anything wrong with that, just different from the persona she sells. Persona. A dangerous word. A deliberate word. Carla continued. She moved to Boston 8 years ago. No family here. No real friends. But 3 wealthy boyfriends in 5 years, each richer than the last. Gabrielle's jaw tightened. And how did those relationships end? That's the interesting part, Carla said. Each breakup follows the same pattern. She isolates the man, tries to secure a ring, and when that fails, she leaves, but only after getting some kind of financial benefit. A car, an apartment lease, jewelry, enough to keep up the facade, a social climber, a professional one, someone who studied rich men like prey, then adapted herself to become the perfect bait. Gabrielle swallowed the rising disgust. Go on. Her relationship with Brandon? He's not actually her target. That sentence landed like a blow. Explain, Gabrielle whispered. She met Brandon at a charity gala, Carla said. But through Brandon, she saw William. A chill crawled down Gabrielle's spine. Carla went on, voice steady, unflinching. I check her search history, social media patterns, public interactions. She's been following William, quietly, for months. Not obsessively, but intentionally. Intentionally, Gabrielle repeated. Yes, she researched his projects, his philanthropy, even his marriage, especially his marriage. She looked up articles about you, interviews, photos. She knows you weren't born wealthy. She knows your background. Gabrielle's breathing slowed. Steady, controlled. She saw your difference, Carla said softly, and she decided to use it. The restaurant scene replayed in Gabrielle's mind, not as a burst of jealousy, but as an act of elimination. She insulted you, Carla continued, because she saw you as the obstacle. The obstacle to what? Gabrielle asked, though she already knew the answer. To becoming the next Mrs. Hartford. Silence swallowed the line. The air in Gabrielle's office thinned until it felt needle-sharp. The ache behind her ribs wasn't hurt. It was fury, but a cold one, the kind that doesn't burn but freezes. Carla spoke again, lower now. I looked deeper into her dating patterns. Courtney only dates men who can give her upward mobility. They all have one thing in common. She targets whoever has the most to offer. Brandon is rich, but William... Carla took a breath. William is a legacy. Old money. A level she hasn't reached yet. Gabrielle closed her eyes, not because she was overwhelmed, but because the pattern crystallized. Courtney's stares. Courtney's touches. Courtney's needling questions. Courtney's attempts to belittle her education, her family, her dress, her ethnicity. It wasn't petty jealousy. It wasn't drunken cruelty. It was a campaign, a deliberate assault meant to chip away at Gabrielle's worth in William's eyes, to embarrass her in public, to make her appear small beside the right kind of woman, to weaken the marriage while strengthening her own proximity to William. For the first time, the pieces aligned. Courtney didn't want Brandon. She wanted William. She wanted the ring. She wanted the Hartford name. She wanted the life Gabrielle built with blood, grit, and brilliance. The insult wasn't random. It was an attempt at displacement. A coup. Carla, Gabrielle said quietly, how far do you think a woman like her would go? Carla hesitated, not because she lacked an answer, but because she had too many. A woman who reinvents herself for every wealthy man? Carla said slowly. A woman who lies for sport? A woman who is willing to humiliate a billionaire's wife in public to weaken her position. Gabrielle's pulse throbbed lightly in her throat. She might go very far. Too far. Meaning, Gabrielle pressed. Meaning Courtney isn't just manipulative, Carla said. She's ambitious. An ambition without ethics. Another pause. That's how people get hurt. Gabrielle opened her eyes. They no longer held confusion, or anger, or even fear. They held clarity. Cold, sharp, strategic. Courtney Blake had declared war. But she didn't realize she had chosen a target who didn't lose. Not in court, not in life, not in love. And now Gabrielle knew what she was fighting against. Not a jealous mistress. Not a rude dinner guest. Not a petty socialite. She was fighting a woman who wanted her life. Her husband. Her place. Her legacy. But Courtney made one fatal mistake. She underestimated the woman she sought to replace. Because Gabrielle Thompson wasn't just a wife. She wasn't just a lawyer. She wasn't even just a strategist behind a $2 billion deal. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman forged in fire, in danger, in hunger, in grit. And now she knew the game Courtney was playing. She knew the pieces. She knew the stakes. And she was ready, because when a mask cracks, the real battle begins. Brandon Mitchell walked into Gabrielle's office with the swagger of a man who believed the world bent for him. He always had that air. Smooth suit, expensive cologne, the lazy confidence of old money fused with new arrogance. He expected a meeting about paperwork. He expected pleasantries, maybe an apology for the misunderstanding at dinner. He expected Gabrielle to smile, soften, overlook. He did not expect the storm waiting for him. "Come in," Gabrielle said, not looking up from her desk as he entered. Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that precedes earthquakes. Brandon stepped forward, his grin already in place. "Gabrielle," he said warmly, "glad we could chat. I assume this is about finalizing the filings? We're on schedule, too." She lifted one finger. Just one. He stopped talking immediately. "Sit," she said. There was no warmth, no charm, no softness. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, but he obeyed, lowering himself into the leather chair opposite her. He watched her for a moment, trying to read her, but Gabrielle's expression was unreadable, smooth, cold, perfectly neutral. The expression of someone who's already decided the outcome before the conversation even begins. She closed the binder before her and turned it toward him, tapping lightly on the final page. The signature line, William's name already neatly printed, and beneath it, the empty line, her line. Brandon's smile faltered. What's the issue here?" Gabrielle didn't blink. "You know what today is, Brandon?" He cleared his throat. "Thursday." "Correct. Thursday. And the filings are due Friday at 5. He nodded quickly. "We're well on track." "No," Gabrielle said. "We're not." Her fingers tapped the blank space again. Her signature line might as well have been a loaded gun sitting between them. Brandon swallowed. "You haven't signed yet?" "No." He let out a shaky laugh. "Well, that's okay. That's what we're here for, right? Let's sign and—" "Brandon," she interrupted softly, "do you know what happens if these documents aren't filed by 5 o'clock tomorrow?" He hesitated. Some delays. A few setbacks. Nothing major. Gabrielle tilted her head. "You're lying to me." His face tightened. "No, You're leveraged to your teeth," she said, voice low, precise. "Your credit lines are exhausted. Your investors are restless. And your company is holding itself together with dental floss and denial." Brandon's jaw dropped. How do you know that?" She ignored the question. "If this deal collapses," she continued, "you lose everything. Properties, assets, partnerships, including William." He stared at her, realizing, too late, that he should have taken her seriously at dinner, that he should have intervened, that he should have respected her. But he didn't. And now he was sitting in front of the woman he underestimated, with his entire empire hanging by a single signature she controlled. Brandon exhaled carefully. "Gabrielle, what do you want?" There it was. The question she'd been waiting for. She leaned back, hands folded, posture flawless and composed. "I want 4 things," she said. "Non-negotiable things." Brandon nodded slowly, dread tightening around his throat. "Okay, I'm listening." First, her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Courtney will issue a public apology. Not a text, not a phone call. A public statement acknowledging what she said to me at dinner and why it was unacceptable." His face reddened. "Gabrielle, that's not negotiable," she repeated. He swallowed. "Okay, fine. What else?" "Second," she said, "you will end your relationship with her." Immediately, Brandon blinked rapidly. Gabrielle, that's personal." She cut him off with a single look, the kind that could freeze blood. "This is business," she said, "and the woman you're dating is a liability of the worst kind. Ambitious, deceptive, and dangerously close to harming the man I love." Brandon looked away, shame flickering across his face. He knew she was right. He had always known Courtney was poisonous. He just never expected to be called on it. "What's the third condition?" he whispered. Gabrielle's expression softened, not with kindness, but with purpose. "A scholarship fund," she said. $500,000. Established in my mother's name. For underprivileged law students." His head jerked up. $500,000? Are you serious?" "I'm being generous," Gabrielle said. "You should be thanking me." Brandon opened his mouth, closed it, nodded. "And the fourth?" Gabrielle leaned forward, her eyes sharp as glass. "The project will include community investment, job training, affordable housing units, and partnerships with minority-owned businesses." Brandon looked like she had slapped him. "That will cut into profits. But it will save lives," she countered. "And your company's reputation. And your future." He stared at her across the desk. The woman he once overlooked, dismissed, underestimated, now revealing the full force of her intelligence and the iron in her spine. He realized, in that moment, that Gabrielle wasn't simply protecting herself. She was protecting her community, her legacy, her principles. And she was doing it with the precision of a woman who had spent her entire life fighting for dignity in a world determined to deny it. "Brandon," she said softly, "you will meet all 4 conditions. And when you do, only then will I sign these documents." He licked his lips nervously. "And if I refuse?" Gabrielle smiled. A small, devastating smile. "Then your company folds. Your investors flee. Your project dies. And Courtney Blake becomes nothing more than a footnote in your failure." She stood. Brandon followed automatically, like he was being pulled by gravity. "You have until Friday at 5, she said. "After that, the window closes." She slid the binder toward him. The unsigned line glared up like a sentence waiting to be delivered. Brandon opened his mouth, but Gabrielle was already turning away. Dismissal. Quiet, undeniable dismissal. The meeting was over. As he walked out, stumbling slightly, pale, shaken, Gabrielle sat back down, her heartbeat steady, her breath calm. She had given him the terms. She had drawn the line. She had offered mercy on her conditions. Now the clock was ticking. And revenge, when wielded by a woman with power and purpose, was not loud. It was silent, strategic, inevitable. The storm didn't come with thunder. It didn't arrive with shouting or dramatic confrontations. It came quietly, at 7:12 a.m., when Gabrielle's phone buzzed on her nightstand. She hadn't been asleep. Sleep felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. She'd spent most of the night tracing the edges of her power, replaying the conversations, steadying herself for the fallout she knew would come. But even she didn't expect it to crack open this fast. She picked up her phone, blinking at the notification. Courtney Blake has issued a public statement. The words hovered on the screen like an omen. She tapped it. A social media post filled the screen, long, dramatic, dripping with falsified humility. "Yesterday, I behaved in a manner beneath my values. My jealousy clouded my judgment, and I spoke hateful words to a woman who deserved none of them. I deeply apologize to Gabrielle Thompson and to everyone who witnessed my behavior." It went on, and on, and on, attempting remorse, attempting vulnerability, attempting redemption. But the internet is not a forgiving place. Within moments, comments flooded in, hundreds, then thousands. "This is racist trash trying to save face. You didn't apologize. You got exposed. Gabrielle handled you with more grace than you deserved. Girl, we saw the video. Just log out." Imagine calling the wrong black woman street garbage when she's smarter, richer, and kinder than you. The dragging was swift and merciless. People reposted the apology, dissecting it line by line, exposing every lie, every contradiction, every calculated choice of wording. Someone leaked screenshots of Courtney bragging to a friend about her plan to get closer to William. Someone else leaked voice memos where she mocked Brandon behind his back. Her mask didn't just slip, it shattered, and the shards cut her own face. By 9 a.m., every gossip blog, business site, and social circle in Boston was chewing her alive. Her name wasn't trending for glamour, it was trending for disgrace. When Gabrielle walked into her office, her assistant, Maya, looked up with wide eyes. "Have you seen the internet?" she whispered. "I have," Gabrielle replied. Calm, reserved, as if witnessing the fall of a woman who tried to destroy her was just another item on her morning schedule. But the collapse wasn't over. Not even close. At 10:04 a.m., Brandon burst into her office, eyes red, shirt wrinkled, sweat dotting his hairline. He looked like a man drowning in consequences he never thought would reach him. "Gabrielle," he rasped, "we're done. It's over." He sank into a chair without waiting for permission. "She's gone," he whispered, voice cracking. "She moved out this morning, took everything she could carry in 2 suitcases, and left." Gabrielle watched him with that quiet, assessing gaze of hers, the one that made men rethink their decisions and their dignity. "Good," she said softly. Brandon rubbed his temples. You don't understand. She broke down. Told me I ruined her life. Told me she had nothing left. Gabrielle arched a brow. She ruined her life. And she still has more than the women she stepped on to climb. He flinched, but she wasn't here to comfort him. He inhaled shakily. I called the board. I called legal. I started the scholarship paperwork. And the community clauses? She asked. They're in motion, he said. Affordable housing allocation. Local contractors. Job training. All of it. I'm doing everything. Good. You should. He owed more than an apology. Then you're on schedule, she said. Her tone was cool, but not cruel. She was giving him room to rise, not out of mercy, but out of principle. Broken men could rebuild if they faced the truth head-on. Broken women, like Courtney, they vanished under the weight of their own pretenses. When Brandon left, Gabrielle exhaled slowly. Not in exhaustion, but in transition. The terms she set were underway. The consequences unfolding exactly as they should. And somewhere across the city, the final collapse was happening. Courtney Blake didn't pack slowly. She didn't leave a note. She didn't look back at the apartment she'd decorated with Brandon's money. She moved like a woman running from a burning building, except she'd lit the fire herself. Neighbors saw her stumbling down the hallway, sunglasses on, hair unbrushed, pulling her bags like they were filled with bricks. Phones recorded her. Whispers followed her. That's the woman who insulted a billionaire's wife. She thought she was better than everyone. Look at her now. She tried to ruin a marriage. She tried calling friends. No one answered. She tried messaging contacts. They left her on read. She tried reaching out to her past wealthy lovers. All of them had moved on. All of them had heard the news. She had no money, no connections, no reputation. The city swallowed her whole. The same city she tried to conquer with lies and stolen elegance. By noon, she was gone. A rumor, a cautionary tale, a ghost in designer heels rolling 2 suitcases and a collapsing life. Not ruined by violence, not destroyed by scandal manufactured by others, but undone by the consequences of her own cruelty. Her fall was quiet, but it was complete. Her dream of marrying wealth evaporated like smoke. Her social facade burned until nothing was left but ash. Her name, once whispered with envy, was now met with disgust. And Gabrielle? She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She didn't even smile. She simply watched the consequences settle into place like dust over a battlefield. Because revenge, true revenge, wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It wasn't vicious. It was justice. It was balance. It was a mirror held up to someone who refused to see themselves clearly. Courtney had crafted her own downfall. Gabrielle merely refused to cushion the landing. By evening, the scholarship fund had its name, the Deborah Thompson Legal Fellowship, and the community clauses were already saving more lives than Courtney's apology ever could. Courtney Blake vanished from Boston. Gabrielle Thompson rose higher, and the world shifted ever so slightly toward justice wrapped in dignity, precision, and power. The night wrapped the city in velvet, deep, shimmering, alive. From the balcony of their penthouse, Boston glittered like a constellation fallen to earth. Cars hummed below, lights flickered across skyscraper windows, and for the first time in days, the world felt still. Gabrielle stepped outside, barefoot, the cool stone beneath her feet grounding her. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from the cold, but from the quiet. The kind of quiet that comes only after a storm has finished tearing everything apart. A moment later, the balcony door slid open and William joined her. No suit jacket, no tie, just the man she loved. Eyes warm, shoulders relaxed, presence steady as gravity. He slipped his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her gently against him. They stood like that for a while, neither speaking, the city breathing below them. Then he whispered against her hair, "I'm proud of you." Gabrielle closed her eyes, not because she needed reassurance, but because the softness in his voice hid a place inside her that had been clenched tight for too long. "You didn't get revenge," he continued. "You got justice, and you did it with precision, purpose, and dignity. She exhaled slowly. She hadn't cried through the humiliation. She hadn't cried through the investigation. She hadn't cried through confronting Brandon or watching the consequences unfold. But hearing her husband say those words, words that saw her, honored her, understood her, made something in her chest unclench. William turned her gently so he could look at her face. "You didn't let your past break you," he said. "No," she murmured. "It armed me." He smiled. Soft, proud, certain. They walked to the railing and leaned into it, side by side, two silhouettes against a glittering skyline. For the first time since the dinner, Gabrielle let herself breathe. Really breathe. Long, slow, steady breaths that tasted like freedom and victory and something deeper, self-recognition. Because tonight wasn't just about what she had done. It was about what she had become. As she stared at the city, memories flickered through her mind like scenes from a life she had fought her way through. The cracked sidewalks of Detroit, the hum of broken streetlights, her mother's tired but hopeful smile, the ache in her stomach from skipped meals, the determination in her eyes as she studied under a street lamp, the adrenaline of seeing her name on her law degree. People thought coming from the bottom made you weak. But only people who had never survived the bottom believed that. The streets didn't break her. They forged her. Each hardship, each loss, each hungry night carved something into her, a blade of resilience, a shield of intuition, a spine of steel. Courtney didn't understand that. Brandon didn't. Most people in that glittering restaurant didn't. They underestimated her because they saw the surface. They saw elegance, calmness, grace. They saw a billionaire's wife. What they didn't see was the strategist beneath the silk, the survivor beneath the diamonds, the warrior who learned early in life how to stand alone and stand firm. Gabrielle rested her hands on the railing. The city glowed beneath her as she heard her mother's voice echo softly in her mind. Your circumstances don't define your destiny. You define your destiny. And she had. With grit, with brilliance, with intention. She turned to William again. They underestimated me, she said quietly, because I climbed up from the bottom. They did, he agreed. But they forgot something important. He raised a brow. And what's that? Gabrielle inhaled deeply, letting the truth settle on her tongue like fire. I didn't just earn a seat at the table. She looked out at the city again, eyes shining with certainty. I own the table. William smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. And you built the table. Her lips curved. Yes. And now, she turned fully toward him, her voice lowering into something calm, powerful, unarguable. The voice of a woman who had reclaimed every piece of herself. I decide who sits there. Silence wrapped around them. Not empty, but full. Full of understanding, full of power, full of the kind of peace that only comes after you've fought for it. Down below, the city kept moving. People laughed, worked, argued, dreamed. Life went on. But in this moment, on this balcony, Gabrielle Thompson had stepped fully into her own story. Not as a survivor, not as a victim, not as a billionaire's wife, but as a woman who had taken back control of her narrative. As a woman who understood her worth. As a woman who refused to be diminished. She leaned her head on William's shoulder. He rested his cheek against her hair. No more words were needed. But the world needed one. A warning. Soft. Simple. True. Gabrielle whispered it into the night, letting it drift into the glittering air like a prophecy. Never mistake a quiet woman for a powerless one. The city lights flickered as if they understood, and the night closed around them, not in darkness, but in triumph. If this story left you inspired, shaken, or shouting, "Yes, Queen," hit that like button, subscribe. For more powerful stories, drop a comment telling me the moment you realized your strength. Your voice deserves to be heard. And remember, the world might underestimate you. Let them. Because when you rise, when you choose dignity over destruction, strategy over chaos, and power over fear, you won't just sit at the table. You'll own the whole room. Stay tuned. Your next story is already unfolding.